Hey photographers, if you have a video shoot coming up with the Fuji X-T3 and don't have time to read the manual and fiddle around, here's a quick start guide for video novices. Now, you'll be on your way in about 8 minutes, and if you have time to stick around, I'll share my preferred settings, my favorite hacks, and some advanced tips. Now, we're recording at YouTube Tokyo, and they've been super helpful for this shoot. It's so nice to be welcomed at the YouTube spaces around the world. Now, I'm starting with the X-T3 in its default settings, using firmware 1.01, and I'm demonstrating with the XF16-55 lens. Fuji's MKX series cinema lenses are better for pro video production. Now, the X-T3's high bitrate can use up memory cards quickly, so get large and fast cards. I'm using UHS-2 64GB cards. 128 might be preferred. They're rated for 300 megabytes a second. And with 2 card slots, it's wise to fill them both. Now, using an external recorder is also an option, and I'll cover that in the advanced section. I'm using the Adamus Ninja Inferno to record the screens that you'll see in this video. One of the nice features of the X-T3 is its removable port cover, so it doesn't get in the way of cables connecting monitors, mics, and headphones. After backing up any information on the SD cards, format them. The X-T3 can't record a backup on the second card, but it does record sequentially and seamlessly from one card to the other, regardless of which you set as your primary video card. Before we get to the menu, set the shutter speed dial to 60 and lock it, and the focus mode switch to C. S actually isn't available in video mode, so it's either C or manual. Set the drive mode collar to video, and set the meter collar to multi, but that too is the only option available in video mode. Turn on OIS if your lens supports it, and if your lens has auto aperture, turn it off. If it has a marked aperture, turn it to f4. To stop the screen from switching to the viewfinder when you're shooting on a tripod, use the View Mode button to select LCD only. There are lots of movie setting options, and many of them, even when stills mode has the same settings, the ones with the camera icon are independent and apply to video only. So you can have one film simulation for video and a different one for stills. Now, for most projects, I'd recommend that you shoot in 4K. Even if you're going to be producing an HD video, the quality is higher, and you'll have the opportunity to zoom in up to 2 times while editing if needed. I recommend the new H.265 or high efficiency video codec, and if you're going to be editing, use the all intra setting, as that's much easier on your computer's processor. It won't have to do as much reconstruction. Unless you're shooting for cinema, and I'll deal with that as an advanced option, use the 16:9 video aspect ratio. Use a frame rate of 30, nominally 2997, and with all intra, your only data option is 400 megabits, which eats a lot of card space. So if that's a concern, go back, select long GOP and 200 or even 100 megabits. The quality loss here is minimal, particularly if you're producing for YouTube. 30 is the frame rate in North America and other places, but the frame rate in many countries is 25. You may choose to use that to maintain compatibility with TV sets. 30 may seem better, but you've been watching TV at 25 frames, so I would not consider this an issue. In my mind, 60 is not better unless you want slow motion. We'll get to that later. Before recording, the display shows the amount of recording time available on the card or cards you've inserted. This is the time to adjust the data rate. With H.265 long GOP 200 megabits, you'll be able to save about 40 minutes on a 64 gigabyte card, 80 minutes with 2 cards. Then, on the movie menu, screen 3, check the 4K output setting. The X-T3 can record internally, but also supports external recordings using the HDMI port. There is an option to record only externally. Make sure the SD card is at 4K. Set movie AF mode to area so you can set the focus point. Multi is full autofocus. And if you're shooting people on screen 3, turn face detection on. I use Eye Auto. If your aperture dial isn't marked, set it now. Turn the ring until the screen displays f4. And even though we set the shutter speed to 60, the back dial makes micro shutter speed adjustments. Check that it's 60 or adjust until it is. The last exposure step is ISO. Use auto if you can anticipate large changes in lighting. Otherwise, set the ISO manually. And note that there are no auto ISO settings in movie mode. Use Screen Setup, to change the display custom settings. I find it useful to have the electronic level on as well as the histogram. You may also prefer the large indicators. They too are customizable. I use f4 as a default aperture, but you may wish to open it if the scene is dark, or close it to f11 or f16 if it's bright, or if you feel that a defocused background is distracting or undesirable for this shot. If you've decided to use manual ISO, turn the dial until the histogram is centered, and then back off 1 or 2 clicks, and that should give you a meter reading screen left about 0. But because the meter is multi, let your eye play a role, and feel free to exercise your creativity. The image on screen should look good to you. Don't be a slave to the meter. At this point, you may run into a problem. If the scene is too dark, after you've opened the aperture all the way, setting the shutter to 1/30, as long as there's not a lot of movement, will help. Now, if it's too bright and you've closed the aperture, you'll need an ND filter to get the exposure under control. Press the right side button on the control area to set the white balance. It doesn't matter which white balance you choose as long as it looks good to you. Just don't use auto, as it might make editing difficult. Press the left control button to select a film simulation. My default on the X-T3 is Eterna, as it provides a softer, more subdued look that I like. And I also use Chrome, but with some adjustments I'll detail in a minute. But be your own cinematographer and select a setting based on your taste and judgment. If you want black and white, select it here, using either standard monochrome or the Acros film simulation. Each has 4 color filter variants. And use the mono color tone adjustment to add a blue or sepia tone to your footage. The audio default settings with the internal mic should be fine for ambient sound and for speaking to camera as long as you're close. While recording, do keep your eye on the meter bottom left. If it's always above the midpoint, going into yellow and flashing red, go to screen 4 of the menu audio settings. Change the internal mic level from auto to manual and then reduce the level. You'll be able to judge by the meters. Slightly too low is better than high, as it's easier to turn the volume up if it's quiet than to reduce distortion if it's loud. Now, it's hidden as a button dial setting, but touch isn't enabled by default, so turn it on. While shooting, use touch or the joystick to guide the focus. The focus area can't be sized in movie mode. Well, all right. Press the shutter to record, or if the touch shutter is on, touch the screen. Either way, press the shutter to stop, and now you're ready to shoot. I do have one hack that everyone should be aware of, and that's to use the movie silent mode. It disables all of the physical controls, so touch the on-screen button to set them. It's called silent because you won't hear the clicking of any dials. However, that's not its best trick. When you use silent mode, all of the video exposure settings are locked when you go to stills mode and are exactly as you left them when you return to video mode. That's a most useful trick in my book. Now, if you have a few more minutes, let me start the advanced section. In most situations, I use manual focus, selected with the switch on the front. And on screen 3, turn Movie Focus Check on. And then as soon as you turn the focus ring, the expanded view appears. Use the back dial to change the magnification, the focus joystick to position, and the focus ring to focus. To reset to the full image, press the rear dial. Press and hold the back dial for peaking, the alternate focus check option. Use the menu to set the color and sensitivity that you prefer. The colored lines indicate the object in focus. If you'd like to change the focus from one subject to another, use touch for a nice clean rack focus. If you have cinematic aspirations, the X-T3 has your back. Let's switch the video settings to 4K DCI 17:9. This is the aspect ratio used for movie production. And 24 frames per second, the same frame rate used in motion picture film cameras. And just to show you that Fuji hasn't missed any detail here, purists can set the shutter speed to the exact 180-degree shutter used in motion picture film cameras, 1/48. We've already talked about the histogram, but cinematographers like to refer to zebra for exposure. It's on screen 4, choose left or right. Setting it to 100 will alert you to any parts of the scene that exceed 100 on a waveform to keep your recordings broadcast legal. However, it's also useful to set it to 70%, as that's the usual setting for white skin. Then adjust the ISO accordingly. My zebra hack to turn it on and off quickly is to set it as a custom swipe motion. Now, as long as we're being fussy, let's set a custom white balance, which is super simple to do. Select one of the 3 positions, press right and aim at a gray or white card, press the shutter and then OK. Done. In addition to Eterna, I've been shooting with the classic chrome simulation adjusted to a slightly more neutral setting with the Q menu, making adjustments to the highlight -2, shadow -2, and color -2, as well as the sharpness -3. Again, this is personal preference. I find this a good neutral starting point for color adjustments while editing. If you are using Eterna, Fuji suggests that you can increase the dynamic range to 400 to achieve the optimum results, and that raises the ISO to a minimum of 640, and delivers an extended dynamic range, which I demonstrated in my review of the X-T3. You'll find 12 stops or more useful if you shoot on a sunny day with your talent in the shade. With standard settings, I can either choose to expose properly for Kim or for the background. Switch to Eterna with 400% DR, and the scene starts to become manageable. Note that I am using an ND filter here. For extended dynamic range, there's also F-Log, which provides 12 stops by compressing the standard 8 stops into the middle 50% of the range, adding 2 above and below. Keep your histogram centered. You'll need to grade this footage in post, and remember that for now, most displays can only handle 6 to 8 stops. Let me do a quick demo and tutorial. With standard settings and Zebra at 100, this studio-lit shot of the DSC Labs Cameline chart has about 8 stops of range, as do most objects that reflect light. You can see on the waveform that it's just short of 100 units. When I switch the scene to F-Log, it looks washed out on the screen, and on the waveform, you can see that the 8-stop scene has been compressed to about 2/3 of its original dynamic range. That's great, as it allows a greater overall range to be captured. Applying Fujifilm's free downloadable LUT restores some of the dynamic range, and I can grade it further, but some of the mid-range gradation is now gone. So, use F-Log only when your scene, because you're shooting outside in sunlight, requires. Then sample and experiment so that you have the exposure and the grading that you're going to do in post figured out. The X-T3 does not have in-body stabilization. Use a tripod or gimbal, which provide a steadier image than any stabilization I've seen. If you are shooting handheld, use the viewfinder. That helps to steady the shot. Now, I use a Voice Technologies VT506 video microphone. It's hidden in my glasses, and I've connected it to the mic input using its super long cable. But, of course, there are many more audio options, from wireless mics to separate dual system recording. The X-T3 is fairly sophisticated with audio controls, and the internal and external mics are set separately. With this mic, I find the appropriate setting to be about -6. Now, I mentioned that you might use the 60 frame mode for slow motion. That will enable you to edit playback to 50%. That's available in 4K and records audio. To slow the action further, use the Full HD high-speed recording. It's 1080 HD resolution and records without sound, MOS as we used to say back in the previous millennium. Options here range from 2 to 5 times. It's a useful tool to have for special occasions. The X-T3 does have a stills time-lapse mode using an interval timer. Set the interval and the number of images, which can be infinite, meaning until the memory cards are full. You'll have to turn the stills into video using a computer. And here's my hack for this. Use 16:9 medium and JPEG only. That provides a video aspect ratio in smaller files, but still bigger than the 8 megapixels needed for 4K video. I'm using an Adamus Ninja recorder, which is connected to the HDMI port. This can record a higher quality image than the internal SD card, using a higher bit rate and 422 color. And if you're using F-Log, doing color grading and creating high quality output, you'll appreciate those details. The output settings to the HDMI out, resolution and frame rate, switch when they're selected from the movie mode settings. For pro editing, timecode is available with multiple options to configure to your needs. Turn HDMI record control on to use the camera shutter to start and stop the external recorder. And there are several settings. We've already looked at the 4K movie output, but note that if you select HDMI 4K only, there's no time limit to your recordings, except of course the storage capacity on the external recorder. I have the info display on, but turn it off for a clean output for recording. There are multiple tally light options, which indicate that the camera is recording. Lights on the front and the back can glow or blink, or can be turned off completely. If you're vlogging, use the remote app, but be aware that it's only capable of shooting at the 1080 HD setting. There's little danger of the X-T3 overheating in normal shooting conditions and temperatures, but it may happen. I've seen the overheating icon, but I haven't yet had the camera shut down because of overheating. And here's a battery power hack. Using the newest PD-type USB-C external battery or charger will power the camera. Fuji's optional battery grip also extends battery life and can also power the camera when it's plugged into the wall. Now, I do enjoy interacting with you, so post your relevant questions and civil comments below. Go out and shoot until your memory cards are full and your battery is empty. And if this channel and my content pleases you, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks!